Joining me today is one of my dearest friends and one of my closest colleagues, Cassandra Erkens, who is an author, speaker, and consultant in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. Cassandra, along with myself and Nicole, is one of the architects of the Solution Tree Assessment Center. She has been a prolific voice in assessment over the last 2 decades. She is the author of several books, including three that we have co-authored together with Nicole, as well as countless book chapters and for anthologies and other publications. She is a prolific writer as well, and is also a sensational workshop facilitator who devises some of the most thoughtful workshop activities that I've ever been a part of. She and Nicole have been schooling me on those workshop activities for years now. Cassie and I met years ago at the Assessment Training Institute when we were both presenters at that conference. And we often talk about the story of seeing each other every 6 months and saying, we should work together. And then we'd leave the summer conference and then we'd come back in December and we'd say, we should work together. and well, it finally happened, and Cassie and I and Nicole joined forces with Nicole to form the Solution Tree Assessment Center, and the rest, as they say, is history. So, Cassie, I'm excited to have you on the podcast. So, welcome, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Thanks, Tom. It's a thrill to be with you, and thanks for those kudos. It's always a pleasure to learn from you too.
Thanks. And for listeners, obviously, we are friends, we are colleagues, and other than this year, because of COVID, Cassie and I have spent a tremendous amount of time together. But I'm going to put my podcast host hat on for today and try to keep this focused as an interview as opposed to a casual conversation that we just have countless times. So we're going to focus today on what I think is, Cassie has strengths in 360 degrees, but common assessments are obviously an area that Cassandra is an expert in, and certainly has a lot to offer, both in sort of the COVID situation, but also independent of COVID. So I want to begin, Cassie, with, you wrote the book Collaborative Common Assessments, and you are a vocal advocate for the use of common assessments in schools. So if schools are wanting to move in the direction of common assessments, or if they're feeling frustrated by what they see as an inefficiency or an ineffectiveness with what they're doing so far, so they've tried it, but they're frustrated. So independent of COVID, because we'll talk about COVID momentarily, what are some of the foundational pieces that schools should seek to have in place to maximize the promise of collaborative common assessments? What are those foundational pieces for schools?
Well, I'm going to say three things. I would say there's three big pieces that need to be in place. The first is context. It's so important that people know the why, because you could easily use common assessments as a weapon instead of a tool. So what are we going to do with the data? What's the purpose for gathering this information? And the work that I try to do with you, Tom, and Nicole through the assessment center is to really focus on hope, efficacy, and achievement. Like, are we using the assessments to get the right things to happen, not only for students, but also for our teachers? But John Hattie found that a major theme is when teachers meet to discuss and evaluate and plan their teaching in the light of feedback based on their own evidence, that's when we can get the greatest growth. And so that would be the vision. Like, we're trying to maximize the power of our instruction. So let's work together and learn from each other about our best instructional strategies. So know the why. The second piece is make sure that our teachers have a really strong foundation with assessment literacy, that they understand what we're supposed to be doing with the design and with the feedback, so that it's actually making a big difference and it's causing growth rather than simply evaluating and denoting who fits in what category. And then finally, the last piece would be the infrastructure. And this is the piece that often is missing and makes teachers the most frustrated. Like, we're doing the work, we're looking at the data, but there's no system in place to intervene when kids aren't getting it. There's no schedule change. There's no time for us to meet to actually do this heavy lifting. So you have to have the schedule set up so that teachers have time to meet and plan and look at the data. You have to have the protocols in place to support teachers so that they can make these decisions quickly and with some sense of ease. And then you actually have to look at the systems that are getting in their way. Like, you can't put kids into an intervention and expect them to improve if you're not going to allow them to get the grade that shows they improved. So you have to look at the little details, like, what are the hurdles that are blocking kids from getting to the highest level of achievement? And can we examine those carefully and remove them? So we build systems and we remove hurdles. So those would be the three.
Yeah. It's interesting because the conversations about data and interventions and all of that. So often I hear teachers talk about, oh, common assessments. That's just trying to undercut my autonomy or undercut my opportunity to do my own thing or to add my flair. And I think missing the point about the collaborative part, the professional learning part that comes with those conversations. So when you think about common assessments, in the context of COVID, so let's talk about now since basically March when everybody's shut down and quarantined, and then we're into hybrid models and we're into virtual learning and we're back and forth, and some schools are face to face, and there's all of this happening. Uh, so a two-part question would be within the context of COVID. One is COVID-19 or not, there have to be some aspects of common assessments that are universal and timeless. So what are the aspects that hold up even in this situation that we're in? So let's start with that. And then the second part is, what are some ways that schools you've seen or advice you would have for schools who make important adjustments given the COVID-19 situation? So part one, what holds up and what stands the test of time regardless of pandemic? Part two, what adjustments are necessary or can be made to continue to make the collaborative common assessment process a productive one and fruitful when it comes to student learning?
Great questions. Thank you. So what stands up, whether it's COVID or not, is that we really need to help our teachers focus on what's most essential. There's way too much to teach and not enough time to do it. So let's get a laser-like focus. Let's prioritize. And in the era of COVID, that's never been more important. Like now, with limited time and limited resources, we better make sure we've got the most essential of the most essential. And we're even going to need to start bundling some of these standards so that we can get through stuff and really make sure we're getting kids on grade level in this face of a COVID slide, if you will. The other thing that holds up is how will we know? And actually what happened with COVID was it brought to light the fact that some of our assessments, because we had the luxury of having kids sit in front of us, we knew they were doing it themselves, but now we don't. So when they're behind the screen, are they texting someone? Are they asking mom? Are they Googling? How do we know they know? And so it's brought to light the issue of, do we have the best assessment designs? Do we have sufficient and accurate evidence of what a child knows? And as a result, I would say teachers have had to work hard to think about what's a better assessment. And again, it's a laser-like focus. Like, could we ask fewer questions that cause deeper thinking and moved our students from just being knowledge parrots into being seekers who created or produced new knowledge. So they're not just regurgitating, they're having to think, and that's asked us to think about the questions that we're writing. Are we getting better questions for our students? And then we always have to think about how do we know and what are we going to do when they don't know it, especially now? What are our interactions when the kids aren't even available to us? How are we going to make sure that they're learning in spite of all of this chaos? So it's really paramount now that we gather data quickly and we look at that information so we can become agile and try to be as responsive as possible before it's too late. Because we've already got this COVID slide going on. So how are we going to really focus? And then what are we going to do for the kids who already have it? Those 4 questions that a PLC would answer are questions whether you are a PLC or not. That's the work that guides good instruction to get really focused on what kids need. So what happened when the pandemic hit was it brought to light a lot of those gaps. Many systems have tried these things that I think are most effective. So what I've seen works in this situation is treat every assessment as if it's going to be virtual. So even if you're in a hybrid and you've got some kids in the 2nd grade classroom and some kids at home, if you treat every assessment as if it's virtual, then you're ready if we flip back and forth, no matter what. And you can still engage students in collaborative learning. So we can have our students in the classroom partnering through a hyperdoc or something like that with students who are virtual. So we can make sure that all of the kids are moving together and we don't widen the chasm between the haves and the have-nots from those who aren't with us face to face. Limit our assessments, not doing too many. One of the big issues we've seen is kids are overwhelmed. We have to be honest, right now, everybody is under stress and everybody is feeling a tremendous amount of pressure, especially our kids who don't have the knowledge or resources to manage this kind of emotional burden. So let's limit the number of assessments that we're doing and make sure that they're assessments kids would want to get to. I think we should try to put Disney out of business by being the most engaging place kids could possibly be right now. Get them thinking about the right stuff so that they're using their mental energy in a positive way. And then actually really needing to improve our grading practices. I heard you have the podcast with Tom Gusky, and you
Yeah.
talked about narrowing that range of grading and making sure that, you know, we're getting the best information in the best way possible, and getting to more equity from one teacher to the next with how we're scoring these kinds of things.
Right. Right. It's been so, listeners, you know, this is episode 12, and I think listeners, if you've been listening all along, you are hearing these consistent themes from so many of the experts I've had on about prioritization, about, you know, quality over quantity in terms of assessments. So Cassie, you're just echoing and talking about some such important aspects of navigating the pandemic. How have you seen, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, have you seen examples or hypothesize about how schools in a virtual environment might still, from the teacher perspective, how do we collaborate? How do we make this, how do we co-score, or how do we make this a meaningful experience, even though we might not be in a face-to-face situation in our collaborative team meetings?
Great question. So just yesterday, I was working with some middle school teachers, and we were actually putting up pieces of work right on the screen. We were talking about the types of mistakes kids were making. We were showing our questions. We were talking about whether or not we'd actually define terms for kids. So we were really having a powerful, reflective conversation as various teachers, and we went through different grade levels. It was middle school, so we had grade 6 showed their assessment. We talked about the questions. Grade 7 showed some of the student work. So there's all kinds of different ways to do that. But
Mhm.
it's about finding the space and then making sure that we maximize our time and putting the right work up to talk about it. How are we going to get kids to success later? Not
Right.
just let's just sit and talk about this stuff, but we got something to accomplish by the end of this next 4 weeks. So what are we going to do now to get ready for that?
Yeah.
So all of our conversations need to be very purposeful.
Was that just through Zoom, or was there another just through Zoom and sharing screens?
Just through Zoom and sharing screens. We were
Yeah.
all in different spaces.
Yeah. That's that, you know, again, sometimes it's just, if you have the habit and you have the desire and you understand the impact it'll have, you'll kind of find ways to make that happen. And that's not to say that folks that are in stressful situations where they can't collaborate, that it's their fault. We're not saying that, but certainly by building the habit, schools that have those habits are able to sustain them in the best way possible, given the limitations of what, you know, not being face to face has. So you talked a little bit about this, and so let's pick up on that theme, because this was kind of in your previous answer. But, you know, obviously collaborative common assessments are ideal if they are in, you know, a PLC at work kind of model, so to speak. Like the collaborative teams within a PLC would have kind of a thorough and predictable routine established. But I'm thinking about teachers. Not every school has implemented, say, the orthodoxy of a PLC model, but are thinking about common assessments. Maybe common assessments is their entry point. Maybe down the road, there'll be a PLC school. We don't know that. But without a PLC model or a framework, how might a motivated group of teachers go about this collaborative common assessment process?
That's also a great question. I've actually met teachers who've done that. They've decided that the research is strong and that they need to be doing this and that they would benefit from it. So they've found a network of interested colleagues, help them build the why, because nobody's going to just jump in for no reason, right? So find
Right.
that network, even if it's virtual, even if you're reaching out to teachers in a different system nearby you, but find that network and then look for opportunities to connect. What are the most feasible, right? The best times and the most feasible ways that we could connect, and then really get clear about what are your shared resources, especially if we're in a virtual situation. So are we going to use like Microsoft Word? Are we going to use in OneDrive, or are we going to use Google Docs? What are we going to do? But where are we going to house our resources? And then let's start doing the process of asking the 4 questions, like what's most important? As we look at, for example, the British Columbia curriculum, like where do we think we really need to be focusing on this? Or as we look at the state standards, whatever it might be. And then really thinking big, like what are we trying to accomplish, but starting small. For
Mhm.
me, a common formative assessment could be a single question. So let's agree, and we don't even have to be teaching the same text. So let's say it's social studies and we want to be looking at whether or not kids can argue from evidence. You could all be in a different passage and you could actually be saying, okay, but here's my passage and here's the question, and we could approve each other's questions. Yep, that's going to get us to the right level of rigor. That's going to get the right information. And then we'd get the evidence and we'd say, okay, so when kids can't argue from evidence, what's getting in the way? So we're going to start small and we're going to engage in like data moments if we're not going to have full data meetings. And we're going to start to really unpack when kids don't understand what's getting in their way so that we can make strategic choices.
Right. Can we circle back to that for a moment? Because I think that is one of the most misunderstood parts of common assessments, is that when people talk about common assessments or they hear about common assessments, they often think about these epic moments that happen every 3 weeks or so. And you very quickly, and I understand why, but you very quickly went over the idea it could be one question. So let's expand on that a little bit, because I think that is something that gets a lot of, it gets underserviced, if you will, or underutilized as far as what is a common assessment and how you could use one question or just have one pivotal moment that is infused. So maybe talk a little bit more about how you help coach schools or teachers on this idea of a common assessment on a smaller scale.
I want our reflective conversations to be so amazing, so reflective, so insightful, that teachers actually levitate leaving the meeting. Like they can't wait to get back to their classroom because they got new information. Those really big paper pencil tests that are hard to navigate and put all the data together, those are too late and they're too big. And if a kid doesn't get it, you have to go back and do the whole thing. So better is the small chunk, right? And you can get a lot of information from a really good question. So one strategy that I like to pose is to say, let's get really clear. What's our skill? So let's say our skill is draw conclusions. I can draw conclusions. Then how would we define what a kid does when they draw conclusions? They look at both the implicit and the explicit information and they draw an accurate interpretation of what the author intended, right? So if that's the definition, now when kids can't do it, what's getting in their way? So we would use a single question. We'd pull all the evidence together and we'd start to put it into piles. Like these are good cards. They're right. They're good conclusions. These are bad cards. Now let's take those cards and let's sort them into piles. These kids only looked at explicit information. They didn't have any of the implicit or the inferences. These kids had insufficient evidence. These kids had the right evidence, but they weren't reasoning the right way, because each one of those types of errors requires a different instructional response. So when I can help teams look at a single question and start to get into the meat of what they're looking for, then it kind of takes off and people get really excited. Like, I want more of that because that helps me be a better teacher.
Mhm. It's those pivotal moments that, you and I, Nicole, talk so much about. It's just those moments where we make those adjustments, those maneuvers, and being able to just have it happen in a moment's notice. That smaller scale, sort of granular common assessment is something I think folks really overlook at times. And I love the fact that you brought that up. The other one I want to just pick up on misunderstandings. I've also heard this one, and I'm going to set you up for a response. And I know you've heard this one as well. You're at a conference, you finish your session, somebody comes up to you and says, Cassandra, we already do common assessments because we all do the same unit test at the end of our units. How do you respond to that person?
So
I know with kindness and finesse, but how do you respond to that person?
Yeah, so there's so much more to it, and this is not a unit test, and it's not a test that you didn't write, and it's not a checking off the box activity. It's being very, very thoughtful and very careful, and actually focusing on. So we wrote about this in our book, right? Growing Tomorrow's Citizens in Today's Classrooms. That switch between are we using skills to teach content, or are we using content to teach skills? So if we're using content to teach skills, now teachers have to think differently. And so common for me does not mean exact same.
Right.
Common for me means we have the same standards that we're working toward. We have the same criteria for success. We have the same expectations and targets, but we can have different texts. We can even have different questions as long as we're using the same measurements. So when we look at the evidence, do we see kids doing good work when it comes to skills? And so now I want teachers to think differently about their entire assessment design. Like, are we going after the skills, the 21st century skills that matter most to our kids? because you and I both know that in today's world, kids really do need to be knowledge producers, not just knowledge regurgitators. And
Right.
so I want them to think critically, to communicate accurately, to and effectively, to collaborate. So we have to start designing our assessments that direction.
Yeah.
So my response when people say, "But we gave the same test," is, "Yes, but did you get good information out of it? Did it really change you
Mm.
as a teacher? Because if it didn't, then that's not the point."
Right. Right. So nothing wrong with a common summative assessment but if it's not
Right.
helping you grow as a teacher, how effective were my instructional strategies? What do we do next time we teach the unit, or what do we do in response, because this is a skill that runs longitudinally through the class? Then we're really just talking about a standardized assessment. So on the one hand, we lament standardized testing, and then on the other hand, we create the exact same test for the same kids, for all the same kids under the same conditions at the same time of day. It sounds a lot like a standardized environment. I want to pick up on this because this leads me to my next question. You were talking about how we're assessing the same skill, assessing the same criteria. And I suspect that's going to be a similar answer to my next question, which is singleton teachers. If I'm the only drama teacher, or if I'm the only teacher in my school who teaches this subject, how do I participate in the common assessment process with my colleagues?
I think teachers who are singletons have the hardest time getting started, but they have the easiest time after they get it.
Ah,
They're more ideally positioned to flip it and to be more about using their content to teach skill. So I've
mm,
actually worked with career and tech teachers who now you've got family and consumer science, you've got architecture, you've got agriculture, you've got all these teachers who don't teach the same stuff at all. And one
mhm,
teacher on the team might teach six different things. And so now what do I mean by common assessments? So can we look at problem solving? Can we look at some of those big skills? And now I can have kids do problem solving with a bread recipe, and you've got your kids doing problem solving with a soybean problem in the fields. But we're still
mhm,
talking about, okay, but how are kids doing with the problem solving process? Do we
mhm,
see them actually following the steps and making good decisions as a result? And where are they getting hung up, and what do we need to do with our instruction to help them be better at that?
mhm.
Because here's what we know: when they leave our care, information will be available already. It already is, but information will be available to them should they have a new problem. They can go find information, but do they have the skills to navigate it? That's what we
Mhm.
need them to be able to do.
Right. And it seems to be the more skill based that the focus is. So if we have those, as we wrote about, the means and end switching places, and we're focused on those 21st century skills, it is definitely a way for singleton teachers to be more participatory in the common assessment process, because we kind of break down those subject silos, right?
And so, to that point, I think what's hard is when I've always taught language arts or math the way I've always taught it, how could I let go of that content piece that I'm so comfortable with and
Hmm.
flip it to be more about skill? That's a
Hmm.
big shift. And because you and I might have something in common in the math department, I don't have to make that shift because we can make our assessments about what we've always done. So that's why I'm saying a singleton teacher actually on the other side of understanding the shift has an easier time of making it work because they're not
Hmm.
so mired in it being about the content parts.
Yeah, that content hurdle is a big one for singleton teachers. If they can get them past that, they really, as you say, they can flourish with the common assessment work for sure. Let's shift a little bit to principals and district leaders now, who, let's say they attended your workshop or your institute or the conference. They're all in with common assessments. They see the value. They understand, to a point. They understand the complexities and want to implement common assessments in their schools, but can't seem to move the needle in their context. They just can't seem to get a cohort of teachers interested. So, how do they start to maybe get teachers' attention? What are some ways that they can make a compelling case for why common assessments are such an essential part of the overall assessment strategy in a school?
I like that in your question, you started with the very thing that's first, like develop the compelling case because
Hmm.
people aren't going to do it just because you said, go do it, right? So it's a both and. I want to create the rationale because clarity precedes competence. Like, why are we trying to do this? And I want
Hmm.
to make it about the big why. Like, this is about increasing achievement for kids and teachers. We're going to be the best we could ever be. We're going to be the place kids can't stand to miss every day. We're going to be, and I want them to have that really exciting vision that draws people in. But the other thing we know is sometimes you have to, and Doug Reeves talks about this a lot, sometimes you have to behave your way into a new belief. So start small. Help teachers pull out a little single question and then see if you can sit at the table with them to tease out the deeper missing pieces. Like, why did that happen? Why did that student do that? What do you think might have been going on in their brain at that time? And get teachers to have those kinds of conversations that make them hypothesize and guess and strategize, because that's where the joy is. What I've learned is it's kind of like kids in a candy shop. You cannot put student work in front of a teacher and ask them to be quiet. Because oftentimes I'll put work out on the table and say, in a minute, we're going to talk about student work, but don't talk about it yet. And they will not wait. They'll pick up that work and they want to talk about it right now. So if we can get them looking at that work and really talking about it and getting some insights from it, that's where the joy is. And teachers tend to want more of that. So show them what it looks like by modeling it. And then I would say the other big piece, and this is a big one, empower, 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 empower. If you want your teams to function as decision-making teams, then do not make their decisions for them. Do not answer their questions when they say, what do you want us to do? Invite them to explore, invite them to come up with answers. So lead with yes, if, yes, when, and yes, maybe. And then don't answer the question. So here's how that sounds. This was the principal in an elementary school, and the 5th grade team had decided that they were going to just use one long extension opportunity for the entire semester because they were pretty sure it was going to be the same kids, just the gifted kids. So let's just do a project, and once a week they can dip in and work on it. She knew that was the wrong thing for them to do, but she also knew I cannot say no, because teachers will just look at me and say, well, if you know the answers, then stop making us figure it out. Just tell us what you want us to do. So she said, yes, if the data prove it works. I'm coming back in 2 weeks and I want the data. So indeed, she went back in 2 weeks and she said, is your system working? And they said, no, we had to give that up after the first week. And she said, really? Tell me why. And they said, well, we figured out it wasn't going to be the same kids who needed extension every single time. So we couldn't keep that system. So she allowed them to use their own evidence to make those decisions. So set your parameters and your guidelines and your resources and tools to help the teams, and then empower them.
Yeah. It really also, I think, and I don't know if this is more a question than a statement, but you and Nicole and I often talk about the importance of being assessment literate, and for leaders, to engineer those opportunities. It just speaks to that instructional leadership and understanding sound assessment. Not that you have to be the expert in the school, but to know enough to engineer those opportunities to participate meaningfully with teachers. And that not only builds your credibility, but it really helps you move that compelling case along, doesn't it? This idea of being literate with assessment practices.
And one of the things that I just want your listeners to know is that develops over time. You can't do all the research and just sit down and be assessment literate. It's practice-based. You have to try something. So be willing to give yourself permission to fail. Just don't hold it against the kids when we write bad questions, right?
Right.
You can get really good. Believe me, excuse me. You can get really good results using bad assessments if you all have the same laser-like focus and you're helping the kids do it. You can get amazing results when you start writing better assessments. So start with what you have, but as you go through it and you learn more, be willing to change those assessments and to make them even better so you're getting the best information imaginable.
Yeah, it takes time. You're absolutely right. I think that sometimes people want to rush their assessment literacy or their growth. And I often tell people, this assessment journey for me began 17 years ago, and it's still in the making. It's still in the development, and I learn something new all the time. And so it's a work in progress. That's for sure. Okay, so let's finish up here with some look fors or some make sures, if you will. What are some of the make sures or look fors that teachers and schools should keep in mind so that they can avoid? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how do they avoid a superficial approach to the common assessment? Because a lot of people could say, well, we do common assessments. Well, so do we. But one school does it with depth, another school, it's more of a surface level. It's tick the box. Yeah, we can now say that we do it. So How do you know that you are a robust, meaningful, collaborative common assessment team as opposed to just giving it a superficial approach?
So part one is there should be as much reflection as there is planning. And far too often we put all of our efforts into the planning part and we don't get to the reflection part. The reflection part is where the deep learning is. And so that's missing. The L in PLC is missing if all we're ever doing is planning, planning, planning in each meeting. So I have 5 questions to ask the listeners, 5 questions to think about. Number one, are you learning how to be a better teacher at every team meeting? Because if you're not learning how to be a better teacher, then what's the point of going to all those team meetings, right? So are you making yourself vulnerable in that process of question one, learning to be a better teacher? Are you sharing resources and expanding your repertoire and challenging yourself? All of that is part of, are you becoming a better teacher? Are you, question number 2, are you eliciting intriguing findings in your data? Or are they just numbers and you're moving kids around and giving them labels and sending them off to be fixed somewhere? So are you actually eliciting something that causes you to think differently about skills and instruction and so on? Are your data conversations inspiring different actions? Are they generating enthusiasm in your team? And do you love the assessments you employ? So, and most importantly, do your students love the assessments you're employing? Because if you're just doing it to go through the motion, use the data, record it, and send it out into the world, it's not making a difference. So I'm trying to use the process to get people to love learning. And is that happening? And then the last question is, does each rotation of assess, analyze, reflect, respond motivate you to get to the next rotation? Like when you end one meeting, do you leave and say, okay, let's try this and let's get back together and see if it worked? Because if that's not what's happening, then something's wrong with your protocols or your processes. I'm not going to say something's wrong with you or your team, but I'm going to say check in with the systems that you're using and the conversations that you're having, because it's supposed to be inspirational.
Yeah. Sometimes it's an uphill climb for sure, but the energy and excitement around assessment the opportunity for us to grow professionally? Are our students excited about the opportunity to know where they are rather than being intimidated? This goes right back to the conversation we had at the very beginning, just that you made mention of hope and efficacy. What is our assessment routine or our assessment systems doing to the energy and excitement about learning for our students? And are we also excited as learners as well? So to me, that's great advice and great questions to ask. I often say to people, I hope we can do this again, but Cassie, I know we are going to do this again. And at some point, I'm hoping that Nicole will join us and maybe we'll do some roundtable stuff when we eventually get back to traveling and get to see each other at our conferences and institutes. But I've really enjoyed having you and listening to some of the advice that you have for folks really exploring the common assessment process. But we're going to finish today with a little bit of fun, as I always do. I'm going to ask you a few lighthearted questions. I've got 5 questions to finish up with you, and these are ways for listeners to get to know you a little bit personally. Nothing too intrusive, but just some fun questions that'll put you on the spot and give you a chance to share some insight into Cassandra Erkens, the person, with listeners. And then we've got one final question to finish up with as well. So first question is, what is the last fiction book that you read?
The last fiction book that I read is The Murder at the Dolphin Hotel.
Oh, okay. Who's the author?
I couldn't tell you. It was a brand new author to me, and I was just trying to pick her. It's a series. It starts with that book, and I decided I'm not going to read the series. But that's the last one.
That's the last one you read. Yeah. No, it's as I know you so well, I know that I'm in the same boat, that the vast majority of our reading is nonfiction. It's work around assessment, it's research, and it's other people's books and things like that. So I asked the question about fiction because for me, it probably would be 3 years ago or something like that. So here's one. Do you ever eat food that is past its expiration date if it still smells and looks fine? Like, what's your what's your threshold? How do you decide?
It cannot smell bad or look bad, or if you take a small nibble in the corner and it doesn't taste right, like a rancid nut, then you throw it away.
Then you throw it away. I wonder sometimes if if we even know that it's past the expiration date when we eat it, right?
So just the other day, I took some. One of our strategies is to freeze things, and so we freeze cheese because we don't go through it fast enough. And I was making something with nachos, and I needed the shredded cheese. I took it out of the freezer, and I looked at the expiration date, and I thought, my family's going to look at this and think it's expired. When the truth is, I literally just took it out of the freezer, but the date on it says it's expired. So
Right.
you never really know with those dates.
Yeah, you take your chances, right?
Yeah.
Question 3. When it's just you, your car, and the open road, what song do you belt out loud every single time? This is your go-to Cassie Rockstar in her car. What's the song that you belt out loud every single time you're driving?
I don't have one. Isn't that terrible? I really don't have one. I drive in my car with no sound on, and I'm in my
Really?
place.
That's interesting. Do you have a favorite song?
No, I have a lot of favorite songs. I love
Okay.
music, and so
Yeah.
and it goes from country to jazz to rock and roll. So I have a lot of favorites, but no, my preference is to have everything quiet.
You drive in silence. That is something I did not know about you, and that's interesting. Yeah, because I think you would be you'd be one of 6 people on the planet who probably has no sound on in their vehicle.
That's
Whether it's a, you're supposed to say most of the time when I'm driving, I'm listening to the Tom Schimmer podcast is what I'm
probably.
doing. That's fine. It's all good. Next time
I
you
do
need an answer, just let me know. Yeah, I
I do
appreciate that.
listen to the Tom Schimmer podcast when I'm on my treadmill.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Question 4. What's the luckiest thing that's ever happened to you? You just felt really lucky.
Meeting you and
Oh,
Nicole and building the assessment center. No, I'm not kidding. You know, I think that sometimes we get stressed with the work that we're trying to do and the way we're trying to change the world. But you know how many people don't have that opportunity to have this place in the world to be able to make that message known. So I feel very blessed and very fortunate in my life that I've been able to be surrounded by amazing intellectual people who have hearts of gold, who are trying to make a difference, and that we can rally our energies together to do that work. It's a privilege.
well, Cassie, I do appreciate that. But listeners, honestly, I did not set that question up. That
He really
question
did.
was
That's true.
that question was supposed to be, I found $50 under my tire at a parking stall one time, or
Yeah,
something
that
like
doesn't
that.
happen to me. That happens to my siblings, but I
Yeah.
was behind the door when someone was passing out luck.
I was expecting one of your famous travel stories where it actually worked out. Listeners, we won't get into it, but Cassie has some of the most epic travel stories, and we often talk about them. But I've just had some lucky experiences with travel where I'm an hour late for my connection, but the plane I'm supposed to go on has been delayed, so I make my connection. Those are the types of lucky things that I was hoping that you would answer, but I feel lucky as well, Cassie, and certainly our friendship and our work together with Nicole is really is a blessing, and I just am thankful for it as well. So thank you for going in that direction. I didn't expect that, but it was very kind. All right, last one, and of course, 'tis the season, and I've been asking. I asked Tara last week. I asked Bill the previous week. This is the burning question that everybody has on their minds right now, and that is the question of Die Hard the movie. Is Die Hard the movie a Christmas movie?
No, it happens at Christmas, and there's a lot of joy at the end of it, but it's really not about Christmas as the main message. No.
Yeah, see, I'm with you on this because I don't understand. Like, do I just have to put a Christmas tree in a scene and therefore it's a Christmas movie? Like, what are we talking about here? There's no Christmas theme. There's no, okay, they got a tree up in the lobby of the center or the hotel or the office building that they're in. See, I can't even remember. I haven't seen the movie in so long, but so I'm with you. I don't understand. I honestly can't comprehend this idea that Die Hard. This is not going to bode well for next week, though, because now that the when I'm talking about this, but yeah, I know I'm with you. I just don't see it as a Christmas movie at all. I think that it's a stretch to call it a Christmas movie. So I agree with you. I'm glad finally somebody who gets me and understand who understands where I'm at. All right. So one final question for you, Cass, is I've asked this of everyone I've interviewed, and I've been really interested in people's perspective. One of the long-term themes I'm trying to explore with the podcast, and eventually we'll have some interview guests and people on to talk more about this in general. But I'm really trying to look at this theme of success and happiness and what this means to us. So the question is pretty simple. If you were stopped by a random person on the street, you're walking down the street, you stop by a random person, and they asked you, "What's your definition of success?" What would you say? How would you answer them?
I've listened to your podcast and you've had some brilliant insights on this one, and I'm not sure I can be any more brilliant than what you've already heard. I guess it boils down to a single question to me, and that is, did I make a difference? And so I have three C's that that I try to use to did I make a difference? One is confidence, and I don't mean that from the sense of chutzpah or anything like that, but more, do I like the company I keep? Am I comfortable in my own skin? Can I trust my gut, my instincts, my ability to learn? And do I feel efficacious? The second is courage. Am I willing to push myself, to take risks, to challenge myself, to and constantly improve myself and the world around me? And the third is connections. Am I in right relationships with other people, with my community, with the planet? Am I honest and fair and true and just? So it's really about, can I leave the world a better place than I found it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that is a theme that many have talked about, which is just what is my impact? What is my legacy on the people around me, the world around me? I love that, and I think it puts us in a place where we feel grounded. We feel like we're making a contribution and a difference in our world. Um, Cass, I like I said with Nicole, I could do this all day, and often we do this all day and talk assessment, and but I really appreciate you taking the time. I know your schedule is really busy right now, and we thought with COVID things would slow down, and things seem to be as busy, if not busier, than they used to be. And it's crazy. So I really do appreciate you taking the time. Listeners, I would encourage you really to follow Cassandra on Twitter. Uh, Cassandra doesn't tweet as much as she should. I'll just put it that way. But when she does tweet, there's just thoughtfulness, brilliance that comes out of what she has to say and her approach to assessment. So her Twitter handle is @CErkens. And also, of course, Cassandra, along with the rest of our team, blogs and at the allthingsassessment.info. So it's www.allthingsassessment.info. That's the website where our team blogs, and you'll find Cassie's blog posts there. And she has a number of just great posts that you can check out, and you can sort them by authors. So if you want to check out some of Cassie's writings that way, you can check those out as well. Again, Cass, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. I know at some point, like I said, we're going to do this again. I would love to do it with the three of us and record one of our conversations, just so maybe listeners can gain some insight as to how we all kind of work through all of that.
But
So
I would like to switch that one and have Nicole and I interview you on the content.
No, it doesn't work that way. I have the microphone, therefore I have the conch. But the next time we're in the same room together, which who knows, 2024, I don't know what we're looking at. We all don't know, and I don't mean to make light of the current situation, because it is stressful and tough on everybody, but we have to find some way of balancing that for ourselves. But like I said, I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Thanks, Tom. What an honor.
Thank you.